Hey, this week on the show, we're celebrating because DSL is back. Asahi is winning. AMD dropped a Cuda implementation. There's a Handbrake update. FOSDEM just happened, and more. You don't want to miss it, so stay tuned.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is the Untitled Linux Show, episode 139, recorded Saturday, February 17th. Let's cut that out in post. Hey, welcome. It is Saturday. You know what that means. It is time to get the gang back together and to get into some Linux geekiness, open source goodness, all kinds of fun stuff. Of course, it's not just me. We have the whole gang. We've got Rob, we've got Jeff, we've got Ken, and we have a full show lined up for you. And I don't know what we were thinking, but we're going to let Rob go first. And Rob, you got to mind your P's and Q's on this one. Remember, we don't do any profanity on the show. Well, we might make a little tiny exception for this. What's up?
So DSL is back. Exciting.
You mean digital subscriber lines? That way that we all got online in the 90s and the 2000s?
No, I'm not talking about digital subscriber lines or anything that provides internet like that. Okay, so I'm only going to say this once, as maybe some people won't appreciate the name of this project that DSL stands for. So DSL stands for Damn Small Linux, which I will refer to as DSL from here on out.
That's why everybody calls it DSL. Yes.
DSL, not digital subscriber line. Something else. So anyway, a little history. In 2006, DSL was released in as a tiny micro distro that fit on a 50 megabit ISO. So this week, there has been a delay. There was an update in 2011 or 2013 or something. And it's just kind of staggered for a while, but this week it's back, and it's bigger than ever. With a target, the target has changed. Things have changed a lot since 2006, and so has a target. So, today it's hard to find a distro that would even fit on a single 700 megabyte CD. That's compact disc, something maybe a lot of you kids don't know about either, but just roll with it. So that's the size anyway that DSL is targeting. DSL's purpose is to keep old computers running and away from landfills. And CDs have been around for decades. So 700 megabits, it's acceptable. So it is packed with the lightest weight software available, shipping with Flexbox or JWM Windows managers. They're available for you. A bunch of other software, several lightweight web browsers such as Badwolf. And for those watching, I really should change my background here. My background over is a VM that I have running. So anyway, Badwolf. There's a lightweight Office applications, multimedia, and even a few games to pass the time. It comes with about everything a lightweight desktop user could need. And I installed it myself on a VM this week. For those watching, you can see it in my background. It's up and running right there. And I played around with it a little bit. At idle, I'm using about 75 megabytes of RAM. At least when I test, I guess right now for those watching, it's showing about 95 megabytes of RAM. But when I did a fresh boot up, right after install is right around, say, 75 megabits, and just over 3 gigabits of storage. And then I opened up a web browser, started browsing around to Gmail, Outlook, Facebook, a few other sites, just seeing what to go to it. And through that time, it was only one tab. I'm sure more tabs would have changed that, but it stayed under 300 megabits of RAM utilization, and then once I closed it, went right back down. But you aren't stuck with that lightweight software that it comes with. I did an apt install Firefox to see what effect on performance that would be, because the Bad Wolf browser was, I don't know, it was a little lightweight for me. It was a little odd. For those watching, I'll just bring it up here and I'll keep on going. But I don't know. It seemed it's just very simplistic. So Firefox, when I installed it, installed really fast. And then I browsed around to the same sites, and it went a little bit over 400 megabytes. Sometimes it jumped up to close to 500 megabits, but it never went above that in my brief tests. So like I said, I'm sure if I open a bunch of tabs, I could fill up that RAM quickly. But we're talking about lightweight, low-end machines, so you just got to take considerations for that. And like I said, right now right now, just with it open, just to a basic page, it went to like 165 megabytes. Now, I'm going to close that, and it's going to go right back to 96 megabytes. So anyway, if you have a low-end system to keep running for whatever purpose, this could be the perfect distro for you. I wouldn't expect those low-end machines to be running AAA games yet, maybe AAA from 2005, but we've talked about TinyCore in the past, and I don't know if that's really all that usable, but this here, you can actually use it and do stuff with it.
So I've got to ask, you talk about it's good for, first off, I've got my stack of CDRs here, the 90s personified. But I'm really curious what the other than the 700 megs, what the other specs are. Will this still run on a 486? Will it still run on 8 megs of RAM?
Well, so I guess I didn't mention it, but if you look here, I set up this VM with a single core, 2 gigs of RAM only. Mm-hmm. I've never gone over 500 megabytes of RAM in my tests. I haven't touched swap here ever. It's at 0. So, I don't know about. I'm sure it would run on any of that stuff.
So, here's the test. Set up a VM with only 64 megabytes of RAM and try to run it.
See what happens. Yeah. 8 megs.
Is this something?
8 megs is not very much for anything. Like the absolute most minimal distro that I know of is still OpenWRT. And Did you say
8 megs? I think I was thinking 8 gigs, but you probably said 8 megs.
So didn't the previous install of DSL work down to 8 megs of RAM on a 486?
Yeah, I mean that also was back in 2006 when a gig of RAM was probably a lot. So
that's true. That's true. I'm trying to get straight where the new requirements are. How old of a computer can you put this on?
Well, I was going to say this boots up pretty fast. Maybe while you guys are doing your story, I'll try to reconfigure this and see how far down I can go.
Yeah,
considering my first computer only had 4 megabytes of RAM to start with, and I was using ROMs to swap between the DOS and the BASIC. I'd say getting down to 8 megs would be pretty good.
Yeah.
Well, Ken, you've got some older hardware. Is this something you're going to look at maybe installing on some of yours and just see how it does? Because don't you have a single core machine?
I do have that old E machine. I could play around with that. Right now, it's got Puppy Linux installed on it.
Another one kind of aimed at that same older machine demographic.
For those watching the video and seeing the theme I have here, this is not the default theme. I had to change it. I didn't care for the default theme. I thought this was a little more intuitive or more what we're used to seeing.
Gotcha.
The buttons were a little, like the minimize and maximize buttons were kind of odd.
Is that Kong just over your left shoulder?
Yeah, it looks like the internals of a watch.
Oh, it's actually the default wallpaper that came installed. So
there you go.
Whatever that is.
All right. Well, let's chat about getting Jeff on Team Green. Or is it Team Red? Team Red. Oh my.
Team Red.
Team Red. That was quite the. Let's cut that out in post, guys. So let's talk about getting Jeff on Team Red. And one of the things Jeff has told us about several times is he wants compute. He wants to be able to crunch numbers on his GPU, not just get pretty pictures. And apparently AMD was listening. I'm pretty excited about this, but Jeff, take it away and tell us the story.
Well, there's going to be some facets to this, so it's going to be a little longer story. But so for those that don't know, if you're into rasterized gaming performance, Team AMD can hang in there with Team NVIDIA if you ignore the 4090. It's kind of 4090 is kind of off on its own, but otherwise AMD's trading punches with the rest of NVIDIA's cards. AMD is sometimes referenced as Team Red, and NVIDIA is sometimes referenced as Team Green. Now, I know most of my co-hosts run Team Red, but I'm the lone holdout because while I do like rasterization, I also need compute, just as Jonathan said, and that's where Team Red just doesn't keep up with NVIDIA. One of the big advantages for NVIDIA compute is Cuda, which stands for Compute Unified Device Architecture. It's a closed source API which lets people program computational tasks for the GPU. Now, GPUs lend themselves to large parallel matrix style problems and have advantages over CPUs for those type of workloads. So, the GPUs are designed for high parallelism computing, which happens to also be, playing your favorite game is very high parallelism. But because Cuda is proprietary, AMD and Intel can't use it. So it's not out there to just plug in. So today's news article linked in the show notes is about Zluda, Z-L-U-D-A, all caps, just like Cuda. C-U-D-A is also always referenced in full capitalization. So Zluda, which started as an Intel open source drop in Cuda implementation, letting you run Cuda instructions without having to modify or rewrite the code. So as a rough analogy, you can think of Zluda like wine, only for GPU code. And Andrez Janik, I'm sorry, I know I butchered that one, was contracted by AMD in 2022 to effectively adapt Zluda for use on AMD GPUs with their HIP/ROC-M or ROC, capital ROC, lowercase m. And prior to being contracted by AMD, Intel was doing a lot of this development. However, they ultimately just stopped the project, and that's where AMD picked it up. So the last 2 years, he was able to make it work, and actually over at Freenginx, Michael Larrable did some testing and got several CUDA programs to work on AMD graphics cards without any code rewriting. Now, Michael did get an advanced version of the program before they announced it going open source. And that's because there was an agreement that if AMD stopped support for the code, they could open it up to everyone. It's dual licensed under either Apache 2.0 or the MIT license. And just to put a cherry on top for you, Jonathan, it uses the Rust language.
Oh.
So now, before anyone gets too excited, I need to mention it isn't 100% compatible. NVIDIA OptX support is not fully implemented, and some features not using PTX assembly code are not currently supported. But there's a lot that does work. If you look at the article and look at the benchmarks, it doesn't say, now you're going to see where some of these benchmarks, they don't say Radeon, it says graphics device, and that's because they didn't want to leak Radeon running CUDA. They were concerned that some apps might report out to some databases, and they didn't want that getting out. So it's referenced just as graphics device, though that is going to change because the cat's basically out of the bag now. Everyone knows. So one of the revisions first revisions is it's actually going to give you the true name of the graphics card. There are some limitations, as Zluda requires ROCm 5 series release and is not able yet to run with current 6 series. To benchmark, it doesn't always select the right device right away. So there is some forcing of the program, but that's just through some environmental variables, getting it set correctly and takes care of that. So it's not like you're rewriting anything. It's just tweak some variables and you'll be okay. Now, benchmarks, while AMD isn't beating NVIDIA, it is now hanging in there, and I would say a viable option. It is, the 7900 XTX, for example. I mean, it can run pretty close to a 4080, so it's competitive now. Now, interesting, there are some cases where people have run benchmarks, and the CUDA through Zluda runs faster than native ROCm code. So it's actually pretty optimized. Now, CUDA's been around for quite a while, so they've had a long time to optimize everything, where ROCm is much newer. So there's still performance enhancements that can be made. Now, AMD did make the business decision to stop development. Now, part of the thought behind that was that ROCm code now is a lot more prevalent than it was even a couple of years ago when this started. Now, I know that both AMD and Intel are pushing to open up the standards and trying to dethrone CUDA. Now, I say that because even, if you're going to have something computational through your GPU, there's almost always a CUDA version of it. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of things where CUDA is the only version. So that's why they wanted this, but Intel and AMD are going the open source route, and it looks like it's kind of working. It's a little slow, but there's still a long ways, but they are making progress. Now, there is a big question of what's the open source community going to do with the code? Are they just going to take it and run with it, or is this going to be pretty much stay regulated to just a few developers working on it? Or
I have a partial answer to that.
Okay.
I'll go ahead and jump in with the partial answer to that. The Fedora AI ML special interest group are already talking about how to package this. So it seems that it's going to have a life outside of just this one GitHub repo.
That's good to hear, because really, even if ROCm is able to get wide acceptance, there's still a gap for the currently large CUDA code base. And even if AMD and Intel can get everybody on the open source, we're gonna have that gap for a while until CUDA isn't such a big thing.
There was another very interesting comment on this that I saw. It was the developer himself. I forget the context of what it was in, whether it was a bug report, a feature request or what. But he made the statement that there is nothing stopping them from exporting the actual ROCm and OpenGL calls inside of this too. And so what you would end up with is this library where you could run CUDA code, but you could slowly change it over from CUDA to ROCm, like one function at a time, and it would continue to run going through this particular this translation layer. I thought that was really pretty interesting, because making an entire switch across a code base, going from CUDA over to OpenGL ROCm, that's a huge lift. But doing it just a little bit at a time, that might be something that's more interesting, more doable for a lot of these projects. So
and where you have very defined functions, this is where I see AI could help quite a bit.
That's true.
And you're saying they're close, and if they're even close and can do the job, it's it'd be great to get some people moved over to team whatever color AMD is. But just because this week, another story I heard about NVIDIA is apparently they are now the third most valuable company, overtaking Alphabet.
Yes.
So let's stop giving them so much money, because there's.
Speaking of giving money away, I think AMD was smart in giving him the option to go open source if they drop the contract.
Yeah,
because this way,
I kind of
they're going to get.
I kind of get the impression
community
that
support.
I kind of get the impression that he made a point of writing that into his own contract.
It was because, part of the contract.
Yeah, so he did that. He did that with Intel apparently as well. And it's funny that both Intel and AMD both had this idea, let's fund this. And then when they got to the end of the project, they both came to the conclusion that there's not really a serious business case for doing this. And I have to wonder if part of that isn't, this is already so popular. Let's not give people a tool to continue using it. Cuda is so popular. Do we really want to make it easier to use? That's got to be part of the conversation, at least.
Oh yeah, I think so. And from the comments I saw too, that it was kind of nobody. What if nobody uses the open source computational stacks? And now it sounds like, oh, people are getting on the bandwagon, going, hey, if we can do this right and maybe just do it once, and then we don't have to worry about every individual company.
Yeah. Yep. That's kind of the same. It's the same problem people had with Steam, with Valve working on Steam and Proton. If you make Proton too good, nobody's going to write games for Linux anymore. They'll just do it all for Windows and rely on Proton, which, has sort of turned out that way. But what you actually have is people are targeting Proton as something they want to make sure works. So kind of a win either way.
And they did say that there was concern too, that it'd be pretty easy for NVIDIA to kind of change the API a little bit. And then, now you're always playing catch up, or
it's true.
Well, with it being open source, that could bite NVIDIA eventually. Because people running AMD CPUs or GPUs could continue pushing for the open source, and NVIDIA could start seeing that
people
revenue dropping.
Yeah, people jump ship off of Cuda if they do that too much. That's fair.
Or what? Like if people make it so it works with the AMD, API or whatever, instead of the whatever new NVIDIA stuff changes, that could be enough for people to say, well, guess I have to stay on AMD then.
Yeah.
Problem is they're the 800-pound gorilla. Right now NVIDIA has such a huge chunk of the market. I mean, they don't care
today.
Right now. Today.
All right,
one person at a time.
Let's move along, because we've got a total of 12 stories today, and we've gotten through 2 of them. Ken, let's talk about Handbrake.
Be more than happy to tell you about Marius Nestor's article about a new maintenance update to our favorite free video transcoding and conversion software. Yes, I'm talking about Handbrake. This time it's version 1.7.3. Since we do use Linux, Handbrake 1.7.3 fixes the all files open file dialog filter to show all the files, and also addresses an issue where adding a new default audio track would automatically set the gain to minus 20 dB. It also fixes the TX3G to SSA subtitle conversion. That took me down a rabbit hole searching to find out exactly what TX3G is. I'll let y'all look that up. But with that, it also fixes an issue that may cause incorrect detection of source frames per second values, and fixes formatting for log time stamps. macOS users will be happy to hear that Handbrake 1.7.3 addresses a regression introduced in the last version via the workaround for video toolbox crashes on macOS Sonoma systems. This release improves the security hardening of Windows DLL loading within the libhb library by limiting the search scope, improves keyboard navigation on the chapters tab, and fixes some issues with QuickSync video or QSV decoding, drive labels, and the encoding process. Users can expect a more stable and reliable video transcoding experience from miscellaneous bug fixes and improvements. Check out the release notes on the project's official website to find out more about all of those.
Very cool.
I will say the really Cliff Notes version is the TX3G or whatever it's a subtitle format.
There you go.
Yeah, it's been about 30 minutes reading everything about that. I didn't want to drag that into this.
Yeah, we'll stick with the Cliff Notes version.
Yeah.
Speaking of Cliff Notes, there is a bit of Linux kernel news to cover, and that is the CPU topology code. So this is stuff related to Intel's performance cores versus economy cores. It's related to AMD's sort of similar take on that in some of their newer CPUs. It's Thomas Gleixner who did what he calls a deep dive into the terrible mess that is the kernel's x86 CPU topology evaluation code. And he has posted a cleanup, and there's some funny things that he has noted in here. One of the ones is that he says, what's worse is that this just works by chance on a hybrid system due to the fact that the existing ones all seem to boot on a P core, which has SMT. Would it boot on an E core which has no SMT, then parts of the early topology evaluation, including the primary thread mask, which is required, blah, 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 would be completely wrong. Overrunning it later on with the correct value doesn't help at all. So there's some fun stuff in here where it's like the kernel gets it right completely by accident. And so it is a relatively large set of patches. You can go and check out the cover letter and the code itself on the Linux kernel mailing list if you would like to click through and do so. And I find it real interesting. There are a couple of people that have written back in saying, we've got this. And so someone says, we've booted successfully on a 32-socket 3840 CPU HPE Sapphire Rapid system, and it worked. And another was a 60-socket 2160 CPU HPE Superdome Flex system. So it's like some of these big iron machines this is getting tested on, and so far seems to work pretty well. Don't know exactly when we will see this make it into the kernel, but one of the things we've talked about over the last few months is as AMD and Intel sort of experiment with and push out these a little bit more exotic combinations of CPUs and cores, we need more of this stuff in the kernel, and neat to see. Well, this is not necessarily adding it, but it's a big cleanup around how all of that works. So something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, that's definitely very interesting. And just for those that don't know, when you have different like performance and economy or efficiency cores, it's hard to tell where do things need to go, where should they run, and it's trying to clean up the logic behind that and figure out, okay, I've got a task. Where do I assign it? Who do I give it to? And it's complicated.
And there's complications on top of that because the Linux kernel has things like CPU hot plugging. Like, how do you handle that? How do you know which kind of cores were removed when you did a hot plug? There's some crazy hair on this. Very complicated. So
it's like being a manager, huh, Jeff? Try to figure out where to put the work.
Except you don't know what either you don't know what the work is, or you don't know who's going to get the work. So you go, oh, I've got this computer task. I've got this person that's really good for computer tasks, but I don't know if it's going to assign to them because you don't really have the full communication of what the task is versus where the core is. You know it's a power, performance, or efficiency core, but what's this task? It's just kind of a box, and sometimes they're trying to give better hints of what it is or where you should assign it. But
do we need to do a sprint or a marathon?
Yeah.
Your management career must be a lot more cleaner than mine. I don't know that stuff.
Oh, fun times. All right, Rob, speaking of management, let's talk about the management of an open source project, Nginx, and
yes, but
Freenginx. That's a terrible name.
Before I do that, I want to do a quick follow-up on my last story.
Okay.
So I did do some tests. 64 megabytes would not even get very far into the boot stage. Out of memory almost right away.
Gotcha.
So I went to 128. I tried to keep it with what the standard memory sizes are. 128 booted further, still didn't go all the way.
Really?
256, it booted. It worked fine, but it seemed more sluggish, which seems a little odd since it wasn't using the memory, but the web browser seems sluggish to me.
I bet you what's happening is that where it's telling you the memory used, it's subtracting out the memory used for caching.
Sure.
So your system's going to be a little faster if your memory is caching stuff off your hard drive.
It seemed like it wouldn't go past 180 or 90 megabytes. So it must have been using that above there. So, but a text editor worked just fine. So, if you got light work, you can probably go down to about 256 megabytes with it.
Yeah,
but
there you go.
That's about it. So, on to some management stories with Freenginx is maybe how I would say it and how I'm going to say it since it's my story. So,
there you go. It's your story, and you can mispronounce it if you want to.
Yeah, why not? Ken does it all the time. Okay. I'm just joking, Ken. We have fun. So anyway, it seems there is some more drama in the world of open source, and at least when it comes to Nginx. So a quick synopsis of what Nginx is. Nginx is a web server alternative to Apache. It can also act as a reverse proxy, receiving web requests from clients and then proxying that request to another server. So that's just a quick synopsis. If you don't know what it is or you want to know more, I'll let you go into that. But otherwise, I will proceed with the specific story at hand. So now that we all know what Nginx is, let's talk about the drama. One of the longtime core developers, Maxim Downen, speaking of mispronouncing, Downen, is stepping away from Nginx and releasing his own fork called Freenginx because he wants to free it. It should be free. So, great name, creative. So, where's the drama in that? That happens all the time, right? And sure it does. But the drama actually began a few years earlier in some events that could spark, maybe some political debate. But we'll steer clear of that. So what happened is F5 acquired Nginx, and F5, that is a Seattle-based security focus company. Mm-hmm. So they acquired Nginx in 2019, and then in 2022, due to, here's where the political stuff comes in, they closed the Moscow office where Maxim worked, along with other people. But Maxim, he was so invested in this project because he was one of the original core developers on it, that he agreed to stay on as a volunteer, improving Nginx for free. Fast forward to the current times, and Maxim has had some disagreements with current management saying, quote, unfortunately, some new non-technical management at F5 recently decided that they know better how to run open source projects. In particular, they decided to interfere with security policy Nginx users or Nginx used for years, ignoring both the policy and developer's position. He goes on to say that they can do whatever they want. It's understandable. They can do whatever they want for their marketing motivations, ignoring developers and the community. But it isn't something that Maxim himself can stand behind, saying, quote, again, he no longer sees Nginx as free and open source project developed and maintained for the public good. He continues with, quote, as such, starting from today, I will no longer participate in Nginx development as run by F5. Instead, I am starting an alternative project which is going to be run by developers and not corporate entities. The goal is to keep Nginx development free from arbitrary corporate actions. Help and contributions are welcome, so send money his way if you want. And he says, hope it will be beneficial for everyone. But, that's one side of the story. Digging deeper, like I said, F5, their core focus before acquiring Nginx is its security. They're a security company. So, can their security changes really be that bad? And, I don't think so. So according to an article I found later on by Ars Technica, they report that the split is over a disagreement in posting a CVE. And what I gather is F5, they posted CVEs about Nginx, and for those who don't know what CVEs, that's a critical vulnerability. I can't remember what the E stands for, but basically it's a published vulnerability. So to let people know, it's responsible. Hey, there's this vulnerability, patch your stuff. While Maxim apparently thought it should just be fixed through the normal bug fix process and not posted as a CVE. So I don't know. I kind of like the responsible disclosure, letting people know. But there also seems to be some other disputes in the past on ownership of Nginx. I don't know how this plays any role, but it might talk to it. But it talks about the ownership and implications that maybe Maxim stole the code from a previous employer. I don't know. That he was detained at one point, but it seems those criminal charges didn't really go anywhere, at least not yet. I don't know how the Russian court systems work, but it seems so far it hasn't panned out. So who knows if that has any valid value to it. So, anyway, we're looking at, are we looking at politics, someone upset about losing control of their code, or is it corporate greed as Maxim kind of implies? You guys have any further thoughts, something I missed, something other thoughts on it?
So first off, CVE stands for Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures.
There we go.
And what's interesting is F5 is what they call a CNA, which is a CVE numbering authority, which basically means that F5 can they can make CVEs themselves. They don't have to go to anyone else. They don't have to go to NIST. They don't have to go to another company. They've got it's going to be like a block of assigned or there's an agreed upon numbering system, and they can we found a bug. Here's the CVE for it. So that's kind of interesting in light of what's going on here.
Yeah, maybe the marketing he's talking about, since they are one of those people who have a vested whatever in the CV process, that they're using this to bolster their
right.
CV. I don't know what else he could really mean by that.
Maybe I suspect that there's more that's gone on other than just this, because making a CVE over something that's found is not that big a deal at all, especially for a big project like Nginx. They have CVEs all the time, some of them big, some of them small, but this is a normal thing. It's a normal part of writing software.
I hope so. I mean, I hope that's something more than that, or maybe I don't hope so.
Well, I just thought it was interesting you mentioned that they talked about now his opinion, corporate non-technical corporations, kind of running this at the DICE Awards, which is like a video games award ceremony. Lorien Studios, who made the Baldur's Gate 3, they talked about how they're making things based on not shareholders, but trying to build community and fun, and having they were really basically denouncing having companies with shareholders, because then you're beholden to them and not the actual end product as much. And maybe it's a parallel to this. I don't know. I don't know enough facts about it, but
so one more thing I'll tag on to here. The reason this doesn't make any sense to me is the decision of whether or not to assign a CVE is not up to the developers. It's not supposed to be up to the developers. It is very rare for the developers to also be the CNA that covers a particular project. Generally, it is up to security professionals to look at the report and decide, does this come to the level of being a CVE? And there are some exceptions, but this is usually in almost every other project. There's a couple. So like the Linux kernel, there's a lot of things that gets fixed that don't get called CVEs. But in a lot of other projects, anything that could be a security vulnerability, it gets a CVE, and it's not up to the developers. So I'm trying to wrap my mind around where he's coming from. That oh no, it's evil for the corporate overlord to make they assigned a CVE, man. That's how the world works. That's how this has worked for years.
Well, some people just don't want people to know that there's vulnerabilities in their code, but maybe I don't want to.
Go ahead, Rob.
Okay, I don't want to throw too much shades. We don't really know, but I'm going to speculate one other just possibility. Throw it out there. Maybe the marketing really is. Maybe he's the one doing the marketing. Maybe he kind of lost his job. I mean, he got to still enjoy the work, but he's not getting paid for it anymore. And maybe he got to a point where he just wants to get paid for it again and thought, I can make Freenginx, get donations, but how can mine become better than the other free one? Or what's my perspective, my angle gonna be? Is like, what? Here's my angle. I hate all these non-technical people are doing things and I can do it better. I don't know. Could be.
Yeah, David Ruggles just pointed out in chat, the one that I mentioned, the Linux kernel, it's very recently, the Linux kernel, kernel.org, became a CNA. And now kernel.org has control over its own CVEs, which is, pretty interesting. Pretty interesting stuff.
Ken, you had something to say, didn't you?
I was just going to say, maybe it's more that he was focused on the improvements side of it instead of the maintenance side, which most developers tend to be.
Yeah, it's hard to say. Reading between the lines, I kind of get the impression that the bit of code that the problem was found in, the Nginx, some of the developers still considered it to be experimental, and he was making the case that because it's experimental, it shouldn't get a CVE. So maybe this is even hinting at something deeper about, F5 pushing out code that the developers consider to be experimental and not ready for prime time, and F5 is going ahead and giving it to customers. I don't know.
Could be.
And this, so the argument that he's making about, a corporation taking control over an open source project, like that's a thing. That is something that a lot of projects have had to deal with. Some very successfully and some less so. So, I mean, like, you've got the Linux kernel. The vast majority of contributions by code changes that go into the Linux kernel these days come from corporations, people working at a corp. You've got the Linux Foundation. Who is that run by? A whole bunch of corporations. They so far make it work. It's not been a huge problem, but it is sort of a tension in open source that, we spend a lot of time looking at and thinking about. Let us move to AMD news. Boy, Jeff is really on the AMD train today, aren't you?
I am. I'm everywhere, so I don't play favorites.
Switching sides.
What else do we have from AMD, from Team Red?
Well, this is different because this is on the CPU side, which right now Team Red is taking it to Team Blue, we'll just say.
Yeah.
And if rumors are true, it's going to be even more, but we're going to just focus today on some 8000 series. So our friend Michael Arable over at Freenginx has done benchmarking for us to see how the 8500G, the 8600G, and the 8700G perform. Now, right off the bat, I want to say these are not the successors to the current 7000 series of desktop chips. These are small TDP chips for constrained applications. So that's TDP's. I think it's a thermal die power. Basically, it's lower power applications where you don't want to have a lot of power, or you can't afford it because you're running off battery. In this case, we're talking like 45 watts or less. The 9000 series is going to be the new desktop chips that we're likely to see this fall, if rumors hold true. Mm-hmm. So back to the 8000 series, these chips were measured at a couple different power levels. So depending on your application and how much you are concerned about power use and heat instead of performance, you can make an educated decision on how to run your preferred chip. So what they would do is, for example, run one at 45 watts, and then they'd also run it at 35 watts, and then one unconstrained, just to see what it would do. And I don't remember.
A lot of that has to do with, like, so you say you put it in a laptop, and you'll have a various cooling solutions as part of that laptop. And so the manufacturer will kind of downclock it to 35 watts so that the cooling solution can keep up with the amount of heat the chip is putting off. Isn't that kind of where some of that comes from?
Yes, exactly. That's exactly where it comes. And battery life, okay, we have this item we want to charge. Maybe you have a good cooling, but you're saying to make it compact or thin enough, we want to shoot for 4 hours of battery life or whatever it is.
Right.
You can also downclock it to make that last. But heating and cooling is very important as well. So yeah, that all factors into your use case of what power level you want to run it at. And I don't remember off the top of my head, unconstrained, I think they were running like 54 watts. So they're not running a ton more power, even if you just totally open them up. But so now when you're looking at the article in the show notes, and there's a wide range of chips in there. I mean, there's all sorts of Intel, AMD, the desktop series, all over. They did very well. Now there's two sets of graphs in there, basically. So some of them, they did really well coming out on top of many other chips when they compared the integrated GPUs. So now they're, maybe you have a 7800X, and the X for AMD would have the integrated GPU or the equivalent Intel series. This is not compared to any discrete GPUs. Mm-hmm. Now, with just the internal integrated GPUs, they really came out on top and were doing a really good job there. So they're basically top of the heap when it comes to integrated graphics. Now, also, when you're looking at these, they also had compute performance. But a lot of these charts are set up performance per watt. So you'll see an 8700G, for example, running pretty high on the charts and running with the likes of the 7700X3D, but that's not a raw performance comparison. That is, either frame per watt or unit of work per watt or something like that. So when you see them on top, do not think these are trading blows with high end, the 7900 or anything like that. It is per watt. Because some of these other chips are taking hundreds of watts. Mm-hmm. I mean, the new 14900 KS that's coming out, I want to say you can run it up to like 450 watts or something like that. So, goodness. Yeah, it's just keep that in mind. But it shows how efficient these chips are. Now, I don't want to give the idea that these chips are super slow, because in raw, for example, kernel compile time, the 8700G, for example, ran just behind a Ryzen 7 7700 and just ahead of the Intel Core i5 14500. So now that is raw performance compared to the desktop chips. So it kind of gives you an idea where, like, for example, the 8700 is, and there's other raw performance ones. So you can see kind of what your equivalent it is. If you look at all the charts and kind of summarize them, taking the means and the averages, overall, the 8700G at 45 watts it was a little bit faster than the Intel Core i5 14600K, which runs at like 87 watts average. the 8500G at 35 watts was running around the speed of an Intel Core i5-14500, but only using 59% of the power. So you can see a lot of these, even trading blows with these desktop chips, they're using a lot less power. Now, these chips are a good value for those low power, small form factor use cases. But I do want to point out, I've seen others review these chips, and if you are wanting them for gaming and saying, oh, I want to save a lot of money, if you get a slower CPU with a low-end discrete GPU that, say costs the same as one of these chips, you're still going to have better gaming performance with that discrete GPU. So don't get these chips if you're trying to get the cheapest gaming setup you can. There's better ways to do that. These are for power and size constrained applications, which they do a really good job at. Or, maybe you just want a little PC that does some basic things and, kind of a lower end PC, and you don't need discrete graphics because you're not going to game. Then these are a good deal. But I just wanted everybody to be aware of kind of the subtleties there. And so check out the article linked in the show notes for the full large array of benchmarks. There's a ton of them in there. Michael's our guy for benchmarks.
Yeah.
And that way you can make your own informed decision based on your workloads and use case.
Yeah. Now let's chat about something about where these are going to be available, because what AMD has done historically when they'll put one of these G level chips out, pretty much all of them go into laptops to start with, right? And so it's going to be 6 months, probably something like that, after that, until you finally see this chip available for something like a desktop. It takes a while for that to happen, just because, well, I imagine what happens is they have so many of them spoken for putting into laptops. I've actually always been a big fan for doing budget desktops, of taking one of these chips and putting in them, because the way I look at it, it hits a sweet spot where you have something immediately that's low cost that you can game on, and then you can wait 6 months or a year and then do a huge upgrade to it by putting in a discrete graphics card. And so if you kind of have that tiered approach to it, makes sense to me. And then the other thing to think about is if we see something like a successor to the Steam Deck or a competitor to the Steam Deck, it's going to be a chip a lot like this that's going to go into it. So that's kind of an interesting niche that Valve has carved out, that we've seen a little bit of competition start to heat up there, and I'm sure we'll see more.
Oh, I would agree with that. And I agree with your assessment of, like, if you plan on buying a discrete GPU later and using this as a stepping point, yes, you can. I think that's a good idea. It's just, if you're saying one or the other right now, you will have slower graphics now versus the discrete card. Not terribly, because you're looking at, 3050 or, you're looking pretty low end cards to compete with this at the price.
Right.
So, but 1080p, simple games,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
I'm going to have to look into this after the show, but in the comments for that article, there's a YouTube video that's mentioned. It talks about some BIOS bugs that may affect the
there's
bench testing.
There's always BIOS bugs when you're looking at early releases of these things. AMD, there is a bit of a joke. I think it's the AMD subreddit is really where this comes out. AMD fine wine, because it gets better with age. And the joke is essentially that the drivers in the BIOS for AMD, sort of, on Windows at least, sort of starts out terrible and then gets better and better. And so you get more and more performance the longer you have the card. It's pretty typical.
Well, they also talk about NVIDIA being a software company that happens to make hardware, and AMD being a hardware company that happens to make some software.
Yeah, that's funny. That's funny. All right, well, let's move along. And Ken, let's chat about FOSDEM.
I'll be more than happy to. I read across Liam Proven's series of articles based on his 45-minute talk at FOSDEM 2024. I found both the articles and his talk very interesting. He does a great job of reviewing the history of Unix and how Novell's 1993 purchase from AT&T changed the meaning behind the name Unix.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that back then. It basically now means passes open group testing, which is broadly what POSIX used to mean.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean for Linux? To quote Liam, like it or not, this means that Linux isn't a Unix-like OS anymore. It is a Unix. His talk also included a tribute to the late great software designer Nicholas Wirth that we talked about in a previous episode. He discussed Wirth's project Oberon, a tiny Pascal-like language that's a compiler for the language and an IDE for it. That IDE is also a tiling window-based OS in its own right. He compares its size to Debian 12 for comparison. Oberon has some 4,000 lines of code and 262 kilobytes of text, while the Debian project estimates it has over 100, this is B with a billion with a B, lines of code. Liam points out this is the size of the code base that we are building the internet from these days. I don't want to take 45 minutes of your time quoting him, so I'll have links in the show notes to his talk and articles. I hope you enjoy them, but watch out for the Plan 9 rabbit hole. I ended up spending half a day going down that.
Oh, fun. You could do the same with the history of Unix and lots of other things. Yeah, some interesting things to think about there. One of the most fun when it comes to being Unix compliant, one of the most fun facts that I ever came across is that Windows is basically Unix compliant. The only thing that doesn't quite work the way the Unix spec says it should is the fork command. I don't know if that's still the case or not, but back when I read that was the case. Which we can compile a lot of our open source tools to work on Windows through things like Cygwin and all of that. So not really that surprising. Yeah, fascinating stuff. I am going to quickly talk about a couple of Fedora things. The first one is not immediately Fedora, although the answer is Fedora. There's a ZDNet article about the first Linux distribution to deliver a pure KDE Plasma 6 environment. And the author, Jack Wallen, claims that it is Chaos 2024.01. And it's kind of odd that he makes this statement because he also then says, by the way, I couldn't get the installation to work. And when this came out, it was, let's see, KDE 6 was in beta, I think, not even in RC, somewhere around there. Maybe it was an RC. In fact, here he claims it was RC2, so a little bit later on in the process. But still, it wasn't the full release of KDE 6, and Chaos 2024.01 appears to have been a very unbaked release for some people. And I happen to know that the Fedora guys saw this article and sort of scoffed at it, saying, well, if that's all it takes, we've had rawhide ISOs that have been available with KDE 6 this whole time. They're not the first ones. So is Chaos the first to deliver KDE Plasma 6? Sort of, but not really. And for a development or for an actual daily driver computer, wait until the full release comes out. Don't do what I do. Do as I say, not as I do in this case. And then one other really interesting bit of news that I saw is that System 76's Cosmic Desktop, which one, they're getting really close to an alpha release of that you can actually try out. Two, again, the guys at Fedora, very interested in bringing Cosmic to Fedora and having a Cosmic spin, which I think is going to be really interesting, especially if Cosmic delivers on some of the things that they have been promising. If you are a big Pop! OS fan, but you also like some RPMs, the Fedora Cosmic spin might be something to check out.
I saw those screenshots on it. I was a little disappointed at first just because it looked so much like a GNOME, and if I get a new desktop, I really want it to be new. But I mean, it's really only at a glance. They have a lot of additional features and little details kind of all over the place. Mm-hmm. This is my understanding that do make it stand out, so it's not the same. it's the same in that GNOME looks like Mac OS or KDE looks like Windows. Close, but
I will tell you, running on a Pop OS machine right now, that screenshot looks almost exactly like Pop OS looks now. And I think that's really what they were going for. They've already got sort of their image, their branding set, and they just didn't want to use GNOME as the back end to achieve that.
Yeah, it's been a while, but I mean, Pop OS is pretty much looks like it. Pretty much, I mean, it's just basic GNOME with some extensions right now.
Yeah, it's GNOME with some custom stuff on top of it.
Yeah, until Cosmic.
Yes, until Cosmic. I guess in talking about Fedora, I should mention one other bit of Fedora news, and this one I'm really actually pretty disappointed by. One of the things we hyped up about KDE 6 and Fedora is that they were not going to offer X11 at all. And that is no longer the case. I'm not going to get too deep into this because I actually stuck my oar in and tried to convince the powers that be that this was a bad idea. But the KDE SIG, the special interest group, is not doing anything with KDE and X11, but there are other existing Fedora maintainers that were not willing to accept that. I'm trying to be very nice in the way that I say this, and volunteered to maintain the KDE X11 packages. And to the KDE SIG members, this seemed like a very bad idea, but the Fedora Steering Committee, FESCO, Fedora Engineering and Steering Committee, overruled and said, no, we don't have any reason that we should deny a maintainer the ability to add a package. I will not get into any more of the soap opera that this became other than that.
Even with their push for Wayland and some of the older DEs and distros that I used to like to pick on, even them, like Linux Mint and XFCE, they both are introducing alpha level Wayland into their stuff coming up. I think Linux Mint already has. I think XFCE has announced it. So I mean, everybody's doing it.
Yeah. The real problem here is because of the way this was done, it eliminates the ability of Fedora in the future to get rid of X, because what the corner that they have painted themselves into now, and I don't think the people running Fedora realize this, or some of them do not. But the corner they have painted themselves into is, so long as we have one maintainer that wants to attempt to maintain it, we are stuck with X11. And as I put it in one of my messages, that's the worst case scenario, because then you have X11 as a zombie, shambling along in this distro forever, never able to fully die.
So maybe there's a good partnership with Canonical, since they're going to have some X11 in this next long-term support release.
Have we talked about, I don't think we have this in our notes anywhere. Have we talked about Ubuntu 2404? We did. We talked about it last week. Yes. Yep, 2404 is going to ship KDE 5, which is going to be end of maintenance before they even ship it. I've just had a couple of weeks of being disappointed by Linux distros.
You know what? Okay. You know what we got to do? We just need our own distribution, the ULS distribution. We can do it right. Right?
No.
I mean, Jeff knows some Python, so.
Jeff knows some Python. We'll be fine. Oh, guys.
For anybody, I think everybody got it, but if you're on a bad connection or listening to this in a noisy environment, that story, there was a lot of sighing, and Jonathan's head hung low during that one. So
I am not excited that KDE made this decision, or that Fedora, made this decision. I am not excited at all, but I was trying to be nice. I was trying to be diplomatic about it.
How hard would it be for an end user to remove X11?
It's not even going to be installed by default on new installs. So
I know
nobody is forced into installing it, but the problem is that Fedora as a whole is forced into maintaining it.
There are some happy people out there. I mean, I can't believe how many people I run into in certain social groups that just like don't even think Wayland is even ready for testing yet. It's like, and they just won't even like go near it. And I've tried to convince them, but you know.
A lot of that though I run into is somebody that, well, I tried that like 3 years ago and I just didn't like it. Well, you know,
try it again.
Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing how often that comes with everything. I mean, I felt the same way about GNOME for decades, well, a decade and a half. And you know, I tried it again a few years ago, and honestly, I love where it's at today.
It's fine. GNOME is fine it's fine these days.
I mean, maybe Cosmic. You know, I hear Cosmic's going to be fast too. That's what people have said. I've read people say that who have tried it. So, you know, if Cosmic's the faster, more feature-rich GNOME.
So basically, this means when you get Fedora Asahi, you're going to still have X11 with it.
You can, I imagine, still have X11 with it.
I think it's got Wayland, but
well, Rob, take it away. And was Rob a little slow on the uptake there?
No.
Rob is always slow on the uptake.
I caught the I knew there was a segue there. I did not follow the Fedora part. You know, the whole Fedora is keeping X11, Asahi Fedora, blah blah blah, and I knew it's a segue, but let's go for it. So it took a bit for the Asahi folks to get good graphics support on the M1, M2 Apple computers, but they nailed that one over a year ago, and they've moved past even what Apple can do for their own systems. Without any help from Apple, the Asahi folks have made Linux quite usable on Apple Silicon, and now Asahi has better OpenGL support than even Apple can provide. The best macOS solution, the best macOS can do is OpenGL 4.1, a feature set that was released almost 14 years ago, back in 2010, July of 2010 to be more specific. So, you know, thanks for pushing technology into the future, Apple. That's awesome. The Asahi folks, they've been able to achieve OpenGL version 4.6 and OpenGL ES version 3.2, which is the current version today. So they're up to date. They're modern. I mean, modern being they were released in like 2017 or something like that, but it's still the current version. So, you know, the Asahi folks, they did that without any help. Apple can't do it. Next steps for Asahi is supporting the low overhead bulkhead API on Apple's hardware. In addition to supporting native apps, supporting more graphics APIs in Asahi will allow the operating system to take better advantage of software like Valve's Proton. But you know, we're talking ARM, so you're not going to get the full breadth of Windows games. But there are already, you know, they already have a few games written for x86-based Windows PCs running on ARM, based on Apple hardware. So, you know, Apple's never been much for the actual real hardcore gamer, unless you want to play like, you know, whatever on your phone. But and I guess a little before my time with Apple, I suppose maybe back in the early 2000s, I think I heard some people say it was good then, but not, it hasn't been for a long time. You know, and maybe at some point in the future, gamers will be installing Asahi Linux on their Macs just so they can play games on Steam games. Well, any games, probably Steam games on their system. You know, and that someday, you know, maybe it'll be pretty soon. And I really gotta get my hands on an M1. I'm just itching to try out Asahi, Asahi Fedora on M1, but not yet. You know, as we've talked in many times in chats and stuff like that, I throw money away at stupid stuff way too much. But They haven't brought their price down to my stupid level yet.
You gotta start looking in secondhand stores, pawn shops, for
Are
example.
they starting to?
You might
Are
be
they
able to
dropping
find,
there?
well, yeah, what I've seen is pawn shops have trouble selling these things, especially once they get to be a little bit older. And the M1s have been around for a little while, so
Maybe.
might be time to start.
I haven't gone looking for that at a pawn shop, but my limited experience is I've always been so disappointed at things I've seen there. It's like, this is like the price of a brand new almost. What are you trying to do here?
Well,
but
that's true.
Well, it's one of those. 1 out of 10 or 20 is the real diamond in the rough, and the rest is like, yeah, this is just way overpriced.
Yeah.
You got to look.
I've seen like clock radios, if anybody remembers them. I remember seeing one of them there for like $10-15. I was like, okay, that's what I could buy it for in the 80s, but
Yeah. One of the things with a pawn shop, though, is they know that computer is losing value as it's sitting there.
Mm.
And so you've got a little bit more leverage in it trying to negotiate a lower price. Whereas, something like an antique clock or firearm or what have you, that's not really losing any value. That can just sit on their shelf for however long it needs to until they sell it. But that computer, every day it sits there, it's getting a little bit cheaper, and they know it.
do they know that? Do they really?
A lot of them do, yeah.
They just don't advertise it.
They definitely do not advertise that. They don't want you to think about that, but they do.
Price is going down.
Yeah.
That's funny. I saw it for half the price at the other pawn shop. I'll go back there.
Yeah. Yep. All right, let's move along to Mozilla. Jeff, what is going on? What's up with Mozilla?
Well, we're going to talk about layoffs at Mozilla.
Everybody's
and
favorites.
I am going to editorialize in here a little bit too later on. So I will put my opinions in everything here. So last week we talked about how Mozilla was getting a new CEO. Although the old one was still sticking around to focus on other things. They called out how they were going to focus on their core and, really work on Firefox and whatnot. And so they were kind of yay, go team last week. This week, they've announced layoffs. Now, there's going to be around 60 people who are going to be affected. In an internal memo, they said they're going to focus on Firefox and bring trustworthy AI into Firefox. The online footprint scrubber that we talked about last week is going to get some cutbacks. This is the new paid feature to get your information offline automatically. So they're cutting back on that. Mozilla is also going to scale back on VPN and Relay. And Relay is a privacy feature which helps mask your email and phone number. The idea being like you sign up for some things like on a website or whatever, and it's not going to get your mail inbox or your phone flooded with spam. Mozilla said that they felt they were not giving much differentiation than what you can get with competitors. So because of that, they said, these items are struggling. Basically, they're giving you a product equivalent to what everybody else is. So nobody's just jumping on the Mozilla bandwagon there. Mozilla Social is also getting a cutback. So the Mastodon instance is not going away, but they're just scaling it back. They said that if they would have taken a more modest approach, they would have had more flexibility. And the smaller team is said to bring more rapid, smaller experiments to the people in Mozilla.social instance. So basically, they kind of got in their own way is what they're saying. Mozilla Hubs will be going away. This is their 3D virtual world, and they note that there's been a shift away from interacting in 3D worlds. Basically, there's just not enough people using the service to justify the resources supporting it now. Mm-hmm. They say they're going to make a graceful exit and wind it down gently. They don't explain what that means, but I'm sure we're going to find out more in the future. They say they have a lower headcount budget, and they're going to have to be combining roles and some of the people in support organizations. So they have they're focusing to have the right amount of support and optimization in the organization to sharpen their focus. Now, that's a lot of corporate speak, meaning they've given people more stuff to do. I have not seen Thunderbird mentioned, and just I think it was last week or the week before we talked about how they were going to focus on it and put more resourcing into it. Maybe they shifted some people, for example, off of their 3D world into Firefox. I don't know. It was not talked about in the internal memo at all. I'll let you know if I hear anything changing on that. I do want to editorialize here. So this is not linked to the articles in the show notes. This is my personal opinions and thoughts. And I've seen people bring this up, and I know people will bring it up, and I can't say I disagree, but in 2021, Michelle Baker, the CEO who just stepped down or kind of more sideways from her position, was making roughly 5.6 million. And then in 2022 made just short of 7 million. And I know there's a lot of people who are complaining that while the market share of Firefox is going down, she keeps getting more and more money. To put things in perspective, she made almost 2.5 million in 2018. And that was a 400% increase from what she made in 2008. The previous CEO was making around 800,000 a year, and that's when Firefox had a much larger share of the market. The interim CEO, I've not found out how much Laura Chambers is set to make, but we might have to wait for the official end of the year fiscal results. Michelle Baker is still there. I don't know if her salary has changed at all with her new position, but let me know what you think. But personally, I know of several people, just personally myself, who have stopped donating when the CEO's salary became public. And I can see the outrage on the forums and blogs around the internet, especially when a CEO pay cut could have kept a lot of jobs. I do love Firefox. That's my main browser, but I would love to see Mozilla change. And there's a lot of opinion why donate or support Mozilla when I'm just supporting a CEO is kind of the general feeling I've gotten from a lot of people.
Yeah, that is an interesting line of reasoning. CEO pay, especially in the United States, is weird. Because part of it, you have the same phenomenon as with sports, athlete pay. It's because you've got a pool of top tier talent, and you've got a pool of teams that wants it, and they're competing with each other for that talent. And that is a pressure that's going to raise the pay rates. Just that's the way the market works. But it is kind of weird when you have a non-profit like Mozilla that is paying that much for CEO salary.
And especially that amount of increase.
Yes.
I have a great idea. I know how I can help, since you're saying that this is causing controversy and leading people to not donate so much. I have a great idea that could really help bring in the donations. And that is hire me as CEO. I'll do it for $200,000. No bonuses,
annually?
Nothing else. That's all I need.
Top tier
$200
right
annually.
I said 200,000.
Well, and
so if you're listening, Mozilla.
So I do actually appreciate that one of the things Mozilla is doing here is getting away from some of the extraneous things, and it sounds like actually focusing back on the browser. I always kind of thought it was weird that Mozilla had all of these little side projects that they tried to hype up so much. It's like nobody cares about the Pocket. Nobody cares about your VPN. People just want a decent browser. And it sounds like one of the things they're trying to do is get back to that. So that part I approve of. The rest of it, we shall see.
Yeah, and keep in mind, like I said, this was a memo from the company itself. So there's a lot of corporate speak in there. We're going to maximize our synergy to lever our core competencies to better align with customer, blah, blah, blah. So we'll see what this makes. I agree with you. I think the core is what they need to focus on, which they admitted their products nobody cared about, is how you kind of read that. Mm-hmm. And, there was an article that David Ruggles found in our back chat a while back, and she defended her salary by saying, well, I looked around and it's competitive and, I'm actually a bargain. But what does that mean? What is the comparison? There's never any actual data behind it to say, and especially as a nonprofit, well, what nonprofit?
You're not donating your time?
Yeah, she's donating her time. She's only getting $7 million a year, and that's what a bargain. So I don't know. Like I said, I know people personally that said they quit donating to Mozilla just because of the salary. If they were making 200,000 or even 800,000 as a CEO of Mozilla, I think people could swallow it a lot better. But you get into multi-millions, it's just, and I have heard multiple people say, I love Firefox, I hate Mozilla.
When I know awesome people like me will do it for 200,000, there's no reason to hire someone for 800,000.
Sounds like some of us need to try to get on the board for Mozilla.
There are a lot of people like me, I'm sure, who are awesome.
Well, like you said, hey, I know some Python. I'll do it.
All right, Ken, save us from this. Let's talk about IP Fire.
All right. You sure about this, though?
No, but go ahead.
Okay. Well, this is another one from Marius Nestor. It's about the latest release of, as Jonathan said, IP Fire version 2.29 Core Update 183, a hardened open source Linux distro that primarily performs as a router or firewall. It comes with some major changes, including a bump to the latest long-term service support Linux kernel, 6.6.15 by default, providing users with top-notch hardware support for installing IP Fire. Another major change is a brand new look with refreshed colors, a new font, as well as numerous other smaller changes to the web user interface to make the Linux Firewall distro easy to use for newcomers. Some usability improvements have also been implemented across the web UI. IP Fire 2.29 Core Update 183, that just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? Ships with the latest Grub 2.12 bootloader, an updated time zone database to version 2023D, and OpenSSL 3.2.1, which forces the 2048 bits RSA keys. It also patched against the recently disclosed GNU C library or glibc security vulnerabilities. Mm-hmm. A new add-on has been added in this release, namely MyMPD 13.0.6, a bootstrap-based web graphics user interface to control Music Player Daemon, or MPD if you want to be brief. Mm-hmm. I recommend reading Marius's article to find out about all the updated packages and add-ons, unless you like hearing me trip over all those version numbers.
I didn't realize that MPD was still actively being developed, by the way. Total side note. But just a month ago, or less than a month ago, a couple of weeks ago, they released version 14 of MPD. That's of my MPD. My MPD may be different than the so MPD did 2315 back in December of 2023. So still a month and a half ago, still being actively developed. Didn't realize that. And then IP Fire, obviously an alternative to, let's see, what are some of the other players in this space? We have OpenWRT, of course, but there's, what's the one that's BSD based?
OpenSense or?
Yeah, there's OpenSense. There's
well, if you follow the second link that I've got in the show notes, you'll find they also have hardware you can get to run it on.
Oh, interesting. Now that's nifty. Probably pre-installed and
though they're outside my price range.
I imagine you gotta charge a lot for actually putting together and handling hardware. It gets expensive, and it starts taking a lot of resources on the company side. I know because I've done a little bit of that, and yeah, you have to really charge for it to make sense for anybody. Yeah, very cool. So there is, speaking of security stuff, there's a story that we covered last week, but a bit more of the story, the rest of the story has come to light, at least to me, and I figured we would take one more trip around and talk about the Clam AV update that just came out. And that is because it actually has a really, really big security fix in it. There is a feature in Clam AV called Virus Event. And essentially what it is you have a line in your configuration file is a virus event, and then you have a command to run when a virus is detected. And the idea being that you're using Clam AV to automatically scan attachments and emails is really where we're talking about with this. That's not the only thing you can do with Clam AV, but in this case, that's what we're thinking about. And so, you have Clam AV running on either on your email server or maybe, at the edge on your internet router firewall. And it's looking at emails coming in, going out. You can specify an action to take. And, usually that's going to be, here's the binary I want you to run. And then here's the string to pass to that binary. So whether it be in the linked article, the example is a binary that sends a text message. And so the example is, send SMS, a phone number, and then virus alert, $V in $F. Well, what's really interesting about that is that V and that F, they're placeholders. So it's like a formatting string, and those will get replaced by the name of the virus, which of course, that is controlled by Clam AV. That name of the virus comes from the Clam AV database. It's fine. Everything's good. $F is the file name in which the virus was found. That file name is specified by whoever sent the email, which means it is, in the security parlance, it is an attacker-controlled value. And there's some really interesting things you can do with file names. You can have semicolons in them, pretty trivially. Well, the way this gets executed, I won't get all the way down into the nitty-gritty, but it is executed inside the Clam AV code. It gets executed by first running bash, the sh command specifically. And so it puts this string together of here's the command to execute, and then it hands it over to sh. Well, sh has support for things like using a semicolon to put more than one command on a line. And what was discovered here is that you could write your file name. So you send an email, put a virus in the email, change the file name to have a semicolon in it. And when Clam AV found it, it would try to, if you have this enabled, the virus event, Clam AV would try to, notify you that a virus was found. And in doing so, execute the command in the file name, which means it's trivial remote code execution, just by sending an email that goes through it. Now, again, this is not enabled by default, thankfully, but it is a very, I don't know whether it's common or not, but it's a reasonable, let's put it that way. It is a reasonable configuration. And when I wrote about this, the thing that I mused is we would really be in trouble if somebody like, say Barracuda, which can use Clam AV in their devices, had this configuration as part of their default install. And that's where you would really see a problem. And in that case, you would have all of these devices vulnerable by default. And so if you have, specifically, if you have a hardware firewall that scans emails, look for updates for that. And if you run Clam AV on your servers, go look for updates for that. And also, if you run it yourself, check for this virus event line in your config file, because this one has potential to be bad. All right.
Yeah, that's never good.
No,
Remote code.
That one, yeah. I gave it a more thorough treatment on the Hackaday security article too, we dove into a little bit more of the details about the various different ways to execute one command from inside another binary and such as that. If you want all of those
Speaking of which,
details. Yes, Ken.
I was looking at, when I was looking for some of the stories for this week, I really enjoyed reading the Linux View column dealing with curling this week.
Yes, Al Williams, right?
Correct.
Over at Hackaday. Yeah, I enjoy those a lot too. Al comes with some fun Linux foo sort of columns.
As this week he dealt with curling C.
Mm-hmm.
Combine that with that malicious attack, you could actually put a binary file there that would download a malicious website.
Yeah. Yep, that's part of the way you could do it. Because you could technically have spaces in your file names too. Fun stuff. All right, let's get into some command line tips. Rob is up first. What is Zipper?
Well, don't you know?
I mean, maybe.
You do? Okay. All right. So for you people using Ubuntu and Fedora or Arch, there's plenty of you out there. You all know what apt is. Many of you know what DNF is. You know what Pacman is if you're an Arch. But, if you're thinking about going to OpenSUSE or SUSE and you're wondering, I don't know the package manager there. It might be just confusing or hard or different. I don't know if I want to do that. Well, I'm just going to tell you what it is. That, if you're running it from the command line, it's called Zipper. And honestly, a lot of it's very similar to apt. It's unfortunate it's not a little shorter, but you can almost just alias it to apt, and a lot of the stuff would work, such as to install, it's zipper install. To remove, zipper remove. There's zipper search to search for stuff. Now it gets a little different here. To update your repositories, it's zipper refresh. To upgrade all your packages, it's zipper update. Now for me, I am on Tumbleweed, which is a rolling release. So for me, I every time pretty much want to run zipper dist dash upgrade, and that's going to upgrade my distribution every time, which you're going to have quite often when it comes with a rolling release. Another one, and it told me this after I did not a full dist, it was just a simple software upgrade. And that's PS space list, or zipper space PS space, or never mind, zipper space PS. And what that does is that will list running processes which might still use files and libs that were deleted. So if you upgraded libs and different files and you're still running, you haven't rebooted yet, the stuff running on there is still going to be using the old libs. So PS list will tell you what those things are. So if you want to restart those and get the right, you make sure you're using the updated libs. That will tell you what that is, or you just restart. And there are, for those watching, you can see I got a zipper dash help on the screen. There are, that's a great way to obviously see all the stuff using the man, using TLDR, whatever. But there's all kinds of things. There's a dash root or dash R, so you can operate on a different root directory. I suppose if you have a ch root kind of directory that you want to install it into. There's clean to do clean local caches. It seems like a very, I've only just recently switched to OpenSUSE. My main desktop is not Arch anymore. It is now OpenSUSE now for the past 2-3 weeks. And I'll get more into my full-ish review of it later on, but just today, the zipper package manager seems fairly robust and pretty nice so far with my experience with it.
So I was very fascinated and did a bit of looking, and you can hilariously install and use DNF on OpenSUSE projects. That will work because OpenSUSE is RPM based, just like Fedora and all
Makes
of that.
sense.
You can also, thanks to my friend Neil Gampa, install and use Zipper on Fedora, and assumably on Red Hat as well because of that. So I love the cross-pollination between those two.
Have you tried Top Grade yet?
Top grade?
The one I gave a couple of weeks ago.
I have not yet. I'll have to go back and look at the notes on that.
Especially the ability to set it up to do remote updates on your servers at the same time you're running on the local machine.
Yeah, makes sense.
So funny thing to add on to your statement, Jonathan.
Yes.
I thought I'd just check it out to see if it's in the repos, and it is. So if you really like DNF, but you want to run OpenSUSE, maybe the first command you want to run is sudo zipper install DNF, and it's right there, and you can be right with where you're familiar. So I'm not going to spoil how good it is, but maybe Jonathan, maybe you're going to want to try OpenSUSE someday.
Maybe. I thought about it for a while. Probably more likely that I would just try Zipper on Fedora.
It's in the repositories on Kubuntu.
There you go.
What is?
Zipper.
Oh,
cool.
Sudo apt install Zipper.
All right. Ken, what is yours and why is it different than diff? What's different about your command?
Well, while updating our command line tip spreadsheet, I noticed that we had never covered comp. I thought we had before. It compares two files byte by byte. The default comparison, I'm going to show you here in the, for those watching, it's just basically CMP or compare file 1 to file 2. And yes, those are actually the file names there if you're looking at the video.
Nice.
When you run it, it gives you the file names of the first and second file. Then it says differ, colon, byte and the byte number, and then the line number that it's on.
All right.
Excuse me.
Very cool.
Now, you've got some command lines that you can put into. For example, one is -B. With that, it gives you the difference between the first and second at the first difference. In this case, it's at byte 13, line 2. It gives you the hexadecimal value, 145, and the character, E, in the first file. And then in the second file, it's 12 or J, control J rather, which is a return thing. What would send you when you hit the return and go to the next line? Now, another one you can do is -L or -- verbose. I'm going to do -L because it's shorter to talk. And that gives you columns. The first column is the character position, and then the value of that character in the first file, then the value of the character in the second file. Here you see it starting at the where the first difference is located if you're looking at the screen, which is position 13. And of course, as you saw previously, that difference was that it was a character represented by 145 hexadecimal, and the second file had 12. But it goes on down. Now, it would be nice to see what those characters for those are, so you can add the B back in there. And that gives you all of that. Now, what's really nice is if you're wanting to write a script that does a comparison, since the exit output can be 0, 1, or 2, 0 meaning no difference, 1 meaning there's a difference, and 2 meaning there's trouble. It'll give you that. So what we can do, I'm going to go ahead and add here. Find that.
Not showing.
Echo what the output is. You'll see that if you're watching on the video, it'll give you exit output of 1. If I compare file 1 to itself, there's not going to be any difference. That'll be an exit output of 0. Since I know there's not a file named file on my computer, that'll give me trouble. And you can just capture that in a variable to compare for making a decision on later in your script.
Yeah. So I like that. Seems to be specifically aimed towards comparing binary files, because it's given you the it's not the hex output, but basically the byte equivalent of what each of those characters are.
Correct.
Yeah.
So you can compare both text and binary files.
Cool. Definitely a tool to add to the toolbox. And I must admit, that's one that I wasn't familiar with. I will have to play around with CMP a bit over the next week or two.
Which is funny because one of the earlier scripts you did in or command line tips you did in 2022 actually used it.
I'm not surprised. I will find something, figure out a way to do something, and then forget about it. Just it's not part of my norm. I don't have it committed to muscle memory yet. Put it that way. All right, Jeff. Let's say that we're running Ubuntu, and we need a firewall, but everything is so dang complicated. What can we do?
Well, and I would even say basically very Debian based. They say Ubuntu, but it seems to work with Debian, and I've even seen where they've Arch and Fedora can use it as well. But mainly this is Ubuntu and derivative based, which is UFW, or Uncomplicated Firewall. And it's basically an application to manage an IP tables based firewall on Ubuntu. It's already in the repositories, and very likely it's loaded on your machine. Like on mine, I checked it and I already have it installed. It's just part of the base load. It does support IPv4 and IPv6. Now, I'm not going to go through all the details here, but the link in the show notes talks about installing it, which, sudo apt install UFW. That's pretty much it. Now, there's a lot of different things you can do with this firewall. So you can get status messages and it'll tell you what it's doing and, what it's running, what it supports. The basis of this is you can then easily allow and deny IPs. You can do all sorts of port ranges you can allow or deny. You can, it simplifies having to go into the IP tables. You can just simply, like if you want to allow a specific IP address, it's just sudo space UFW space allow space from space, and then whatever your IP address is, and then it will give you feedback and say rule added, so it actually the program took it. So this is basically just to simplify IP tables, because I've heard a lot of people talk about how much of a headache they can be. So with this program, you can add and subtract and disable, reset, do all sorts of things to control your internet traffic for a much safer machine if you're out there not behind a firewall, or belt and suspenders if you're behind your router and you want to make sure nobody's getting in except on the ports that you actually specify.
So I'm curious, does Ubuntu actually still use IP tables at all? Because I know some distros have completely moved over to NF tables, and while the IP tables binary may still be there, it doesn't do anything anymore.
As far as this this specific article talks about it on running with 22.04.
Right.
So if they got rid of IP tables, it would have been recently.
Yeah. And that's, I will say that's one of the advantages to using something like UFW, or, over in Red Hat land, we have Firewall D. Same idea. It's a layer that sits on top of that. And so if things underneath change around some, that's fine. You still have your command line tool that you're used to using.
If you think UFW is uncomplicated, I was considering doing a firewalling type tip myself this week, but I'll have to save that one for next week. And it may even be complex, but maybe less complicated.
It looks like 2310 is still using IP tables.
Interesting. I'll have to go look into the Fedora details on that and see exactly what changed. Because it's NF tables, and I think there's a new kernel component as well. But it's been a while since I last looked into that, so I can't remember all.
I change a good thing. IP tables are great.
I mean, there are reasons. Anyway, so
and
go ahead.
I just even found one on UFW for 24.04.
Right. And so, that's kind of my point. UFW is going to continue to work because that's on the layer above that. So even if they change it from IP tables to NF tables underneath, so if they're using the other kernel interface to deal with firewalling, then UFW can still continue to work without a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, all right. So I had something that I came across this week and had to figure out how it worked. And so you guys get to hear about it too. And that is serial devices in Wine. And you might think, well, why in the world would I need to pass a serial device through to Wine? I will show you why. The reason is, well, in my case, it was, ignore that. In my case, it was GPS. So I have this little tiny GPS receiver that has a USB plug. And, baked in there behind the Goo Tech, it's an Amazon special, there is some sort of uBlocks core, uBlocks being one of the big names in GPS. And there is, first off, configuring GPS chips is a very deep rabbit hole if you start to go down it. Very deep. There is a tool that helps uBlocks put out, it's called uCenter, which is, of course, Windows only. And the way that works is, of course, you plug your GPS in, you select the COM port in Windows, and it will talk to the GPS chip. Everybody's happy. Except, how do you do that when you're running it in Wine? It runs in Wine very well, but how do you get it to connect to an actual physical GPS chip? So I did some research into this, and it turns out that Wine looks to wherever your Wine bottle is. So by default, it's in your user folder .wine/DOS devices, which if you've played around with Wine, you're probably familiar with that folder. Then files in that folder, COM**. So in my case, on my desktop behind me, it was COM33, COM34 was the ones that it chose. Because on newer versions of Wine, it will actually make some of these links for you automatically. But you can go in and you can modify them if you want to. And what is happening there is it's just a symlink from the DOS devices directory off to the /dev/tty. And so it's a link from a COM back to, TTY ACM 0, maybe I think is what things are coming up on my computer. And so you can, if you have a device and you want to go see, well, what did it grab? You can probably just go to DOS devices and do like an ls/-l to do a more comprehensive list. And it will tell you, this is the name of the file. It's a link off to this. Well, if you're looking for TTY ACM1, you go, okay, TTY ACM1, that's linked to COM34. You go into Wine, you fire up the application, and you tell uCenter, I want you to look for GPS on COM34, and it'll come up and work. So that is how passing serial devices through into Wine works. Now you know. All right. That is our News, that is our tips. It has been a great show. It has been a long show, hasn't it? Goodness, that's what happens when all four of us are here and we each have three stories to cover.
Very editorialized stories.
Some of them were, yes, but that's all right. That's what we do. Okay, I will give each of you the last word if you want it. We will start with Jeff. Anything to close us with, sir?
The only thing I got this week is Poetry Corner. With searching comes loss and the presence of absence. My novel not found. Have a great week, everybody.
All right, and Rob, you're up next. Rob is muted. Rob, you don't make a very good CEO when you're muted. Are you back with us?
Yeah, I just have so many windows all over the place that I was shutting things down and I closed. So anyway, as normal, come find me, robertpcampbell.com. Links to my LinkedIn, Mastodon, donate to me. But I guess I want to say, Zipper, I don't think I mentioned it, ZYPPER. So just want to get that out of the way. And also, I don't know. Have a good week, everybody.
More than just muted. Thank you, Rob, for that. Ken, your turn.
Well, following up with that novel approach that Jeff gave, I wanted to share a curious tale by Thomas Claiborne of Broken VPN, the year 2038, and search that expired 100 years ago. Go ahead and read follow the link I have in the show notes to an IT incident report, and then just imagine what we have to look forward to.
Oh, this past Floss Weekly, we had Dave Tott on, and Dave tells this story about a bet he made with Eric Raymond, and it was something about IP addresses and the year 2038. And when he explained the story, I started laughing because I am aware of the 2038 problem, and he appreciated that I got the joke. But I get it. I see what you did there. All right. Thank you guys for being here. It has been a blast, a lot of fun as usual. Thank you to everyone that caught us live, had a good crowd in the Discord, and thank you to everyone that listens and watches on the download. We sure appreciate it, and appreciate having a few new people around listening, as we are no longer a Club TWiT exclusive. Pretty excited about that. But remember, if you want the video, Club TWiT is the place to be. We will see you all next time on the Untitled Linux Show.